All right, welcome everyone to today's APEX office hours. My name is Mark Seefts. I'm Senior Director of Software Development for Oracle APEX. I manage the Oracle APEX development team. And today we're going to talk about building low-code SaaS applications, SaaS app extensions with Oracle APEX. Before we get started, we'll go over a few announcements and updates. First up, we have a new blog post. Oracle Reports is deprecated. How can Oracle help you? You can go to apexoracle.com/blog and read this blog as well as all our previous blogs. Again, that's apexoracle.com/blog. And then our next APEX office hours in 2 weeks is going to be about SQL CL projects, CI/CD made easy for Oracle APEX. That's on November 21st in 2 weeks. And you can watch all our previous APEX office recordings at apexoracle.com/office hours and read up on all our upcoming office hours. Again, this is a link to oracle.com/office hours. There's also a link to the playlist. So we go back a couple of years, so you can watch all the previous recordings of office hours there. The last one 2 weeks ago was about unlocking template components. Right, and we have a few upcoming conferences that I would like to share with you. Next week, there will be the Polish Oracle User Group from November 11th to November 12th. Then also next week, there will be a roadshow in Canada. We're going to go to Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, starting on Tuesday next week in Vancouver, then November 14th, Toronto, and then the week after in Montreal. You can read up more about it following this link. And then the week after that, it's going to be the German DORC 2024 conference and exhibition in Nuremberg, Germany. That's from November 19th to November 22nd. We have many APEX development team members there. And then also that week is going to be the Oracle APEX Tour 2024 in Latin America, in Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Again, the link is here on the slide, and this is from November 21st to November 26th. You can read up on all the upcoming events at apexoracle.com/go/events. All right, then if you do have any questions during our APEX office hour session today, please post your questions in the Q&A. There's also the chat, and I see a lot of you have already said hello. So please keep the hellos coming. Tell us where you're from. But any questions about any of the content that we are presenting here today, please post them in the Q&A section of Zoom. And if you do have any general questions about APEX, anything that requires more research, anything that's not related to the topic we are discussing today, please go to apexoracle.com/forum and post your questions on the public forum. Many APEX development team members are helping out there on a regular basis. All right, and with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers, Vlad Uberov, Simon Hunt, Steve Münch, and Martin de Souza, who will talk to you about building SaaS extensions with Oracle APEX. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and handing it over. All right, good to go.
Thanks, Mark. So today we're going to talk about extending Fusion applications or SaaS applications using Oracle APEX. So when we talk about SaaS, we specifically mean Oracle Fusion apps. So we will be using these terms interchangeably. We can call them SaaS apps, Fusion apps, or in some cases, even FA. So as APEX developers know, APEX is a general purpose app development platform. Developers have been using APEX for all kinds of business problems to solve these business problems. And the most popular use case for APEX is to build an application that is needed yesterday because there is a new business opportunity or there's something urgent comes up. We need it yesterday. APEX is well positioned to do it. APEX excels at rapidly iterating application development, reviewing results with end users in real time, making changes in real time, taking users' feedback, and maintaining APEX apps, implementing patches is as fast. Another popular use case for APEX is a spreadsheet replacement. It is November 2024, and even at Oracle today, we are emailing spreadsheets around, asking people to fill in their part of the spreadsheet, send the results back, and then some person is going to consolidate them together. Well, APEX solves that problem easily. We convert a spreadsheet into a table in Oracle database, build an application on top of that table using declarative wizard, build dashboards, build access control in it, and now you have a single source of truth for your data. Another popular use case for APEX is modernizing existing applications and specifically modernizing Oracle Forms. APEX is well positioned to do that because Developers who were building Oracle Forms in the past can utilize their existing skills in SQL and PL/SQL, but now in Apex in modern web applications. And of course, Apex can also be used to extend the SaaS applications. If you are able to access a data source over a database link or over a REST API, you can build an Apex application on top of it. You can implement custom dashboards, custom reports. You can implement more custom business flows. You can actually simplify some interfaces by extending SaaS applications. Apex is really well licensed. Licensing terms for Apex are quite unique in that Apex is distributed under free use terms and conditions, which means that you can use essentially Apex for free. If you have a license for Oracle database support, you're also licensed for Apex support. Apex is, of course, included with all Oracle database cloud services. Specifically on Oracle Autonomous Database, Apex is pre-installed. As soon as the database is available, you can access Apex Application Builder and start building Apex apps. Finally, there is no licensing cost for developers. There are no licensing costs per user. There are no licensing costs per applications. So if you are an Apex customer and you have a requirement to extend Fusion SaaS application, it's really a no-brainer to use Apex. And developers have been using Apex to extend Fusion SaaS for a long time. This is not something new that we're talking about today. As soon as Apex started to support REST APIs using the Apex Web Service PL/SQL package, people started to access Fusion REST APIs, get data out of Fusion environment, display them in Apex applications, and put data back into Fusion environments. About 6 years ago, we started to heavily invest into REST capabilities in Apex so that you don't necessarily have to code a lot of PL/SQL. You could also use declarative features of Apex in a true Apex fashion, as we say. We've added declarative REST data sources where it can automatically discover response structures. You can use those data sources in various components, such as interactive reports. You can REST enable a form. You can synchronize those data sources. The pagination is handled declaratively. You don't need to implement custom logic in many cases. And of course, you can create REST data source plugins so you can reuse that functionality across applications. So Apex developers have been using these features for a while. We continue to invest into REST capabilities in Apex, where we take common tasks that we see people do and we make them more declarative. So today we're going to talk about 3 key aspects of extending SaaS applications using Apex. We'll have a few slides, but we'll also do a live demos. The first challenge is authentication. So we'll talk about how best to solve authentication problem. It is easier now than it was before. And we will also preview a new wizard that will further streamline the authentication integration between Apex application and your Fusion environment. Then, how do you interact with a SaaS application from Apex? We mentioned REST. We talked about REST, but Fusion has hundreds, maybe even thousands of REST APIs. How do you navigate the maze of those APIs? So we will show you how best to do that, how we would recommend you do that. Finally, is it possible to achieve a seamless user experience when your user is using a Fusion application, clicks a button, and now they're running an Apex application, and this transition is entirely transparent for users. So then when they return from Apex back to the Fusion, they didn't even know that they left. Is it possible to achieve that? And to wrap things up, we'll talk about how Oracle itself is integrating Apex with Fusion applications. So when we start building a SaaS extension, authentication is the first thing that we would wire up, because this will enable a single sign-on for your end users between Apex application and a Fusion environment. And also it will allow your Apex applications to interact with Fusion APIs on behalf of that application user. So to tell you all about it, I would like to hand it over to Simon.
Thank you, Vlad. So hi, everybody. My name's Simon Hunt. I'm the the lead product manager now for Oracle Apex. I recently joined the team in April. Prior to that, I was 25 years with the UK Ministry of Defence, so many of you will know me from the community. And I'm going to show you how super easy it is now to get Apex hooked up with your Fusion Apps environment. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is just to note 3 documents. These documents are references for not just mine, but also Martin's presentation later on. So we've got, first of all, the IDCS configuration, which is the OCI end of it. As you can see here, it's a comprehensive document that goes through the 2-legged and 3-legged OAuth authorizations. Okay, and it's actually a really great document with lots of diagrams and explanations in there. We've also then got the APEX configuration, and if I just quickly show you that, you can see here working with REST data sources and Oracle Cloud SaaS applications. And this shows you the APEX configuration, which I'm going to hopefully demonstrate. And then the final one is the API documentation. So this is really more towards Martin's end of it, but again, a really great document. You can see you've got the quick start guide here, which gets you through how to configure your APIs. And then you've got each of the API definitions in here as well. So just wanted you to note those 3 documents. So I put together this diagram, which kind of shows an overview of how this all comes together. And the big change here is that now we have IDCS federated with your Fusion environment. Okay, so Fusion is the identity provider, then you have IDCS. So the user accounts within IDCS will need to be federated. There's a federated tag. You select that, and then that will be federated to your Fusion environment. And that should all be pre-configured now on your Fusion environment. And then what we're going to do is demonstrate how you can then use basically OAuth to configure your APEX application as a confidential app to your IDCS instance. That will then give you authentication into your application or any of the APEX applications that you create, but it will also give you authorization into the APIs. Okay, and that's done by using the 3-legged. So the 3-legged OAuth handshake, which is authorization code. And you'll see this in the demonstration that I'm going to give. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to a live demo. And this is my first APEX office hours, so I'm in at the deep end. Okay, so here I have my Fusion environments. And you can see here I've got a prod environment and I've got a dev environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my prod environment. I just click it. There you go. And then within here, you can see now that we have an associated identity domain here. Okay, so if I now select that, it's going to take me through to the domains. And then within here on the left-hand side, you can see one of the options here is integrated applications. So I'm going to click on integrated applications. And you can see here several integrations that I've already done. Obviously, I've been testing what I'm going to show today, and you can see them down here. So I'm going to add an application. Then from here, I'm going to select confidential app, and then I'm going to launch the workflow. In here, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this OH Demo 2. That's all I need to put on here. Click Next. And then I'm going to configure the client. So on here, under authorization, we're going to be using authorization code. And then you're going to want a refresh token. Otherwise, your token will time out after an hour, and then potentially your APEX application will not then be authenticated into your Fusion environment. So you're going to need to sort out a refresh token in there. And again, Martin will cover that. Okay, then we go down and we need a redirect URL. So for the redirect URL, if we go to our APEX instance, and here I've got an autonomous instance that I span up. If I take the URL, paste that back into here, and then for the redirect, it's just /APEX_authentication.callback. And then as I scroll down for the rest of the configuration here, the one thing that I want to do is remove the bypass consent. That's a standard OAuth feature whereby it asks the end user permission to use the OAuth credentials. We don't need that because we're going to be in one environment here. So I tend to turn that off and bypass that consent. But the next important thing to do here is to add the resources. So within here, we're looking for the Fusion resources. So I go to Fusion. We've got Fusion Application Cloud. I can add those in, click Next, skip that bit, and then it's a case of clicking Finish. Okay, from here, we just activate that connection. And then we would note the client ID, the secret, and then also if we scroll down here, we've got scope information down here as well. And we're going to need that when we come to configure the Apex application. So now if I go to my Apex environment, I'm going to log into my workspace, go to the application builder. You can see I've already got one here that I tested, but I'm going to create a new application, and we're going to call this OH demo. We're going to create the application. Just takes a few seconds to do that. Okay, so we've got our application. We go to share components. And then from here, we go to credentials on the right-hand side here. And in here, we're going to create some OAuth credentials. So we're going to call this OH demo. And these are OAuth 2 client credentials. And you need to make them as OAuth 2 client credentials so that you can then use them to authenticate into the APIs later on. We need the scope. So if I go back, I can get the scope from here. So there it is. So there's the scope. Copy that. Paste that in. And then we need the client ID and secret, which I've got over here. I think my scratch pad. So I get my client ID here. Paste that in. And then the secret here. Paste that in. And then obviously you need to repeat it there as well. Okay. Click create. There we have it. So we now have some credentials. Now if I go back to my application, which is the OH demo, and then I go to my shared components, the next thing I need to do is to create an authentication scheme. So the one by default that it uses is Oracle Apex accounts. So we're going to create a new one, and it's going to be based on the gallery, and we're going to make it the social sign-in. So that covers our OAuth 2. The credential store, I need to get this right, is going to be the OH demo, which is the one I just created. And then we're going to call this OH demo. Now the discovery URL, I need to get back from my domains here. So if I go to the domains here, I can copy the regional domain from here. So if I copy that domain and put it back into the discovery URL, it then needs to have /.well-known/open-id configuration. The scope will be the same. So if I go back here and go to my scopes, which were down here, let's post the same scopes in to there. Click create. And now I need to set that as the default sign in. So if I go to OH demo and make this current, click OK. That's pretty much everything that I need to do. How am I doing for time? Pretty good. So I just want to do one thing before I launch in and make this run. If I just go to share components, go to lists, what I'm just going to do is, just because I don't want it to display my user information. So I'm just going to go demo user, apply changes, and I should now be able to run this application. So if I click run, let's see what happens. Yes, so I've got that. Now if I pause my flow, I can then log in. So go Simon, hit resume, and as you can see there, it's logged in. So I'm glad that worked. I can't see, is there any applause? It did work. So I got that working. So now I'm going to go back, just finish off my presentation. So I've got a couple of slides there. Yeah, I've got some applause. Thank you. It's my first one. So if I just click on this, just going to talk just for a couple of minutes about the future. So what we are planning to do is to make that even simpler for you. Okay, so we're going to make this almost a one-click install, but it will have to be done in OCI, and then it will also have to be done in Apex itself. So I've got a couple of screen mock-ups on how this will look. So if I show you this one here, so this will be done from the database tools part in connections, and you'll be able to create a connection there to your Apex environment, and it's going to build all the database connections that it needs, the credentials. It's using these substitutions, and so it will just be a single click and it will install from that end. And then likewise, once that's all done, you'll be able to create a Fusion integration using the Create an Application wizard. So we're going to make this much, much simpler. But it wasn't that difficult anyway, but we're going to make it even better. And I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Great. Thank you, Simon. Let's talk a little bit next with some of the aspects of working with Fusion Apps business objects. As Vlad hinted at the beginning, there's many documented REST APIs, one for every kind of business object in each of the pillars like HCM, supply chain management, CRM, and so on. What we're trying to do with this area of functionality is make it possible for any Apex developer to extend Fusion Apps. And in the past, before 23.2, Apex had some support for read-only pagination and synchronization of FA data, but it was a little bit of a not a low-code friendly experience to do anything beyond that. So the executive summary, going beyond that, for every service you worked with, you had to understand what the different attributes and data types were, which attributes were searchable, read-only, or maybe just could be assigned during create but couldn't be edited. And that caused you to have to manually change your app and handle those cases differently. Also configuring which attributes of a service. Many of the Fusion App services have hundreds of attributes. Maybe your region only needs 30, but unless you were clever, you would get all the attributes, wasting time over the network, translating search filters, defining operations, and having to manually set up your JSON payloads to do any kind of data modification was just quite a bit of knowledge you had to have to be able to build an app that was something your end users could make good use of. And that doesn't even handle if you run into a validation error. Showing those errors to the user was also more things that had to be done manually. So our goal is any Fusion REST API can be used in any region as easily as a local database table. And so we've delivered that in the latest release of Apex. And drilling down one level of detail, what does that mean? It means if you point to one of the get all endpoints, we'll see in the docs that they document every single operation, but you'll generally want to focus your attention on the get all endpoint. It's kind of behaving like a table. Returns all the rows that can be queried, modifications of those, which Apex knows how to automatically work with, will fetch a row, insert, update, or delete so that you can just work in a low-code way with any region with that data. Behind the scenes, the REST data source for Fusion Apps will delegate all filtering, sorting, and bulk operations to be done in the backend and only retrieve the necessary data based on what columns you've included in your current region. If you're showing a report with just a name and a phone number, you'll just fetch 2 attributes out of 200 and give much better performance for your end users. And any validation errors that are raised from the business objects will automatically show on the screen to your end users. Lastly, there's some features that I'll talk about in a few minutes that are specifically focused on making it super easy to do query by example pages, parent-child regions and parent-child lists, very common use cases that can be all done by just binding declarative page items to things that need to be filtered in the backend. If you're doing customization on the Fusion data model in a Fusion Apps sandbox, Apex can also work directly with those pending modifications so you can alter the data model in the backend and in parallel do your UI in the front end. Because they plug into the normal Apex REST infrastructure, it means all the features like REST synchronization for less frequently changing data, maybe LOV type data that maybe syncing once a day is good enough to be up to date, as well as local post-processing, where you can join or augment data that you've retrieved from a REST API with SQL that you know how to write. Blending those things can also be done with any Fusion Apps data. So all your favorite region types like interactive reports can be showing data from the CRM leads endpoint and all the features of the interactive report just work. Don't have to know anything about how to make it work. You just simply pick your REST data source and it goes to town. If you need to show data on maps or use faceted search, that also is simply just picking a REST data source out of a list. Creating query by example pages or filtering, you can just do what you're normally used to and use page items maybe to pick a certain type of medium for an artwork and the date range on it's created, and your end user can click the search button and those searches are pushed to the back end so that you only retrieve the data that is relevant for the page rather than retrieving all the rows and filtering it in the APEX database, which was what had to happen before. And of course, if you're building an app where some of the data is in your local APEX database, you can easily build pages that blend data from Fusion apps with data from your local database. Like, for example, maybe you store images in your local database and data about artwork or what have you for custom objects can be coming out of the Fusion backend or any of the Fusion standard objects. Easy to work with parent-child data, blending forms and grids on the same page. Anything that you can do against regular tables, you can also do with your Fusion apps endpoints. And because these business objects are not just the data, but also the validation and business processing that the teams at Oracle built, or also customers can add using customization to the back end of Fusion. For example, a customer can add a validation rule that says unqualified leads can't have a budget or a close date, and your end user using your APEX form simply sees that validation error bubble up as if it were a local APEX validation. The user gets the same experience automatically. So most Fusion REST APIs use a technology that's been around since 1998 called Oracle ADF. You can identify those in the documentation with a URL that has REST API resources in the URL and a version number. Focus, as I mentioned, on the get all endpoints, because once you show the get all endpoint to the APEX REST data source wizard, APEX knows how to use all the other related functionality of the data source automatically. Some of the newer services from Fusion apps are using an alternative implementation approach called a business object service. You can notice the difference by the URL that has /API/boss in the documentation. Again, focus on the get all endpoints. And a future APEX release is going to make it just as easy to work with the ADF-based current set of APIs, as well as any new APIs that get implemented using this boss framework. The APEX developer doesn't need to care. All the same functionality works for both, and this future release will let you just pick it out of the list of REST data source types. So I'll end with a few quick tips, having worked with a lot of internal teams and some customers who have already started using this functionality, about what I think I want to call attention to these important details. And one is the feature called filter parameters. It takes the normal REST data source parameter capability and uses a specially named parameter that's got 3 parts to it. In the bottom left, you can see the name of one of these parameters. The first part of the name matches the attribute on the business object that you want to be filtered, in this case, owner ID. After an underscore can appear one of 3 operators, either equals, starts with, or contains. That chooses declaratively the behavior of how you want to match this filter on this attribute. And the third part is a declarative way of choosing which kind of behavior you want when the value of that parameter is null. Should the filter be ignored? Should it immediately return no rows because it doesn't even make sense without a value for that parameter? Or should we match rows that have a null for that parameter? Those 3 things are all encapsulated in that magic name of this URL pattern parameter. And that parameter then becomes easily bindable to any page item in your page. The second thing I'll point out, and Martin will demonstrate this, is a new category called utility apps in the gallery. And there's the first utility app is the Oracle Cloud Apps REST Data Source Explorer. Martin will talk more about this, but I just wanted to point out where you find that and install it, just like sample apps or any of the starter apps you might have tried. This is a blog article that I wrote in the last 6 months that explains a little bit more about an interesting aspect of programmatic usage of these Fusion apps APIs. Of course, you can use declarative capabilities of any Apex region, but sometimes you want to write business logic, which fetches data, fetches filtered data, creates, inserts, updates, deletes data programmatically, and you can do that very easily with the Apex exec package. And this blog article has the source code for a helper package that complements Apex exec to make writing code like this, where you can use the names of the Fusion business object attributes to do queries and DML operations as an alternative to using the column names, which the Apex exec API requires. But you'll see in this code, it's doing a select from and where from the resources endpoint, a REST data source whose static ID is resources. And then it uses the Apex exec package to loop through the results and assign some application item names so that in other places in your app, you can bind the numerical ID of the logged in user as a party ID. That comes in handy for a lot of things in Fusion apps. So lastly, I'll talk about a debugging technique. If something goes wrong and you get an HTTP 400 error, which is what the Fusion apps REST APIs will return when something goes wrong, you're familiar with the Apex debugging that you can turn on in the debug toolbar. Usually info level is good enough. After you've refreshed the page or made the issue reproduce, view the debug, find the most recent request and drill into that. Maybe you never noticed, but these red dots help you see where the first error has occurred along the request. Clicking on one of those red dots, you'll see the error in the log that was returned by the Fusion REST API. In this case, the supplier was not a valid field, so must have been a typo in an app that I was working on. So that's a quick overview of some of the cool features that make it so that you can use any Fusion REST API in any region as easily as a local table. And now I'll hand off to Martin to talk about the Cloud Apps REST Data Source Explorer.
Thanks, Steve. As Steve mentioned, I'm going to demo the REST Data Explorer, as well as given one of those endpoint Fusion app REST APIs, how do you go and actually develop an application? So the process that we're going to do is, as I said, start with that API, and then we're going to get the list of child objects and then use Data Explorer to actually enhance the application. So the demo today will take the thought of me being a new FA developer, Fusion Apps developer. I'm going to get given this one URL, and how do I get more information on it just given that URL in Apex without having to go through a ton of documentations or a bunch of configurations. So with that, I've got a blank Apex application here, and I'm given in here, if we go here, this is the URL I'm given. And if you go in, it's got a lot of different content in there. I don't really need to know about this, and I'll show you why. So in my application, I'm going to go into shared components. I'll go to REST data sources, and I'll create a new REST data source. And here, the key thing is to use the SaaS REST service. As Steve mentioned, when BOSS becomes available, you'll see additional one. And by selecting this, it actually, Apex will read all that metadata and add a lot of enhancements for you. And I'll show what that looks like in a second. So this is a sales lead, and that's the URL. And here's my, I've already stored my credentials in here. And when I go to discover, you should see a sample set of rows from the sales leads. Perfect. So I'm going to just create REST data source. And if I drill into this, you're going to see that it's actually already defined the delete, the get, if I want to get an individual row, and even how to update a row. So I didn't have to do anything. I just plugged in that URL. And the other nice thing is you'll notice that it uses this thing, Apex resource key. I don't even need to know about the primary key for each REST endpoint. Apex will handle that within the context of a Fusion Apps API. So I'm going to go back to page 1, and I'm going to create a simple report for all of the sales leads. We'll create region. I'll call it leads, directive report. And let's just run this. So this is actually going and making a REST call. And as Steve said, if I debug this, I'd actually see that HTTP request to the REST endpoint. So this all looks good. There's a ton of different columns on a short screen, so you'd want to select which ones. But at the same time, you may not know which ones I should show, which ones I shouldn't, and what they all mean. And that's where you go into the Oracle Cloud, the REST Data Explorer. And I've already installed it. And so if I just refresh this lead, I've got some other apps. You'll see that it shows up here as a sales lead, and you can actually download it. The first time you'll have to click download, but if I drill into it, it's going to provide me with all the metadata about every single column. So it's going to show whether it's queryable, required, defaulted, what type of item it is when you show it. So these are all good things, and then you can edit your reports based on what you should or shouldn't show, what is editable, etc. So you can use all this metadata information to enhance it. You can also choose that for the labels, right? So instead of showing some of these like status code rank, there might be better names for it, and you can get that all from the REST Data Explorer. So now I'm going to go and create an edit page on this because I want to edit each sales lead. So I'll just create a new page. I'll add a form. I'll just call it edit lead. We'll choose a report and sales lead. And I'll just do a drawer page here. So you'll notice that the primary key, I just have to select that Apex resource key, and Apex will handle everything for me. And I'm going to go back to page 1 and create a link column. So to go from the interactive report to that new page. So we'll go to page 2. And I'll just search here for the resource key and select the resource key, clear cache. Now, normally you wouldn't want to show the resource key here. I've just had it because that's what we selected by default. But now you've got this edit button. So if I click the edit button, I'll now get a form. It will actually go fetch all the data, and I can actually edit this and do whatever I need to, add the fields I want to, etc. But if I look at the status code, it just says retired. So there's a lot of these fields here that I don't really know what they all should be. Odds are it's probably a list of values. And if I go back to here, I see that, oh, status code, it should be a select list. Well, what are the options? If I click on this link, it will actually give me the URL to find those select lists. And that URL, though, is going to look something like this. And in Firefox, there's a bit of a bug where it will copy like %3D to escape some of the URLs. So if you are using Chrome, try and replace some of these values. That's what to replace with. But I'm going to break it down. And if you replace it, this is what the URL will look like. And then this is the base URL that we want. So you want to take out the query parameter, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to use that base URL to generate the list of values for the status code. So if I go back to shared components, I'm going to create a new REST data source just for that list of values. So I click create REST data source, and I'm going to put it status codes. It's very similar to the previous one. Now, this time I'm going to click advanced. And the reason why is because I had that named parameter, that query string. And so the query string said there was this parameter name called finder. And then this is everything that occurred after that, the finder equals. And if I click discover, you should see a list of 4 different status codes here. So I'm not really concerned right now about all the other columns right now. I'm just going to click create data source. I'm going to go back to my shared components and add a list of values for the drop-down list. So I click create. Next, I'll put status codes, LOV. Oops. And I'll select the REST endpoint. I'll select status codes, click next. And so now, what is the return column? There's a lot of columns here. And what is the display column? I'm not really sure. If I go back to my REST Data Explorer, I'm going to see that the status codes showed up. So I can go and drill into there and then read all about the metadata. So I have to look into this. So the lookup code is the code used to identify the lookup. So that seems good. And then the meaning is the translated display value. So those are probably the display and return value that I want, right? If I wanted to, I could read different things. I can order it by this if necessary. So if I go back into here, the return code would be lookup code and the display column is meaning. If I go back to edit this, I can go back to edit the page 2. And so I'm going to change that the status code here. I'll select list and go into the list of values and choose the list of values that I just created. So now if I go and I re-edit the same record, we'll see that the status code now has a nice list of values. And I could have also selected the sequence in the shared components, but it just shows you how you can use all that metadata from the REST Explorer then to translate directly within your Apex application. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vlad.
Thank you, Martin. So this was accessing SaaS business objects from Apex applications. Clearly, the Data Source Explorer application, utility application, is a hidden gem. It makes it so much easier for developers to utilize Fusion APIs from Apex. So the final thing that we would like to talk about today is user experience. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I think the goal in many cases is to achieve that seamless user experience where your user doesn't know that they're accessing the native Fusion application or now they're running your extension. And this is clearly an area for Apex where we need to have more improvements in the future. The modern Fusion applications utilize something called Oracle Redwood Design System. And this is not just a skin, a UI skin for your application. This is certainly more than that. This is about your users experiencing the application. This is how they navigate within the application. This is how they find information. This is how they utilize different components. So it's definitely more than just a UI skin. So for example, offering an Apex theme or a Redwood design system is not going to be sufficient. We need to certainly put more work into that. So right now, if your goal is to make the Apex extension for SaaS look more or less similar to Fusion native application, our recommendation is to utilize universal theme, of course, and the Redwood Light theme style. That's probably the best that we can do today, but we certainly are looking into improving this over time. The second part of the user experience is how do you exactly embed or make that transition between the native application and the extension. And typically there are two patterns. One is some customers try to embed the Apex application into an iframe inside of the Fusion skin or Fusion page. The other approach is to do a punch out. So you click a link and an external Apex application opens, for example, in a new tab. So what we found from our experience is that embedding usually has problems, and specifically around authentication. These days, browsers become more and more restrictive as far as cross-origin calls. So some people try to work around these restrictions, but this is generally not a good idea because in many cases that would just compromise browser security. So in our experience, what we are trying to do ourselves is do a punch out. It can still be seamless because remember, as Simon talked about, we still have single sign-on authentication enabled in Apex application. So even though a new tab is opens for the Apex application, the user doesn't have to enter their credentials again because they're automatically logged in and their Fusion session continues. And this is also good for standalone applications too, because there can be use cases where you have a screen in Fusion, let's say native screen in Fusion, and it's just too complicated. There are too many things to enter, and maybe in your case, you only focused on maybe 2 fields or 3 fields that you want your users to care about. In this case, you can actually create a standalone Apex application. You can even make it look like your company design style too. And that standalone application can still operate with Fusion data sources, it still can utilize Fusion Identity. So this is a good alternative as well. So finally, how is Oracle using APEX to integrate with Fusion applications? Going back to Oracle Cloud World 2023, Larry Ellison announced that the majority of new Oracle applications are generated using APEX. And you might think, well, APEX has been used at Oracle for much longer than that. I think APEX was used at Oracle even before APEX was a product. So what's different? What was different in 2023? Well, historically, APEX has been used to build bespoke applications. But now Oracle is building products and services using APEX. And Larry gave examples, such as Cerner New Millennium, or Fusion marketing applications, or Oracle Global Industry applications are built or generated using APEX. Fast forward to 2 months ago, Oracle Cloud World 2024, and Larry Ellison reiterated that direction. And he continued to say that Fusion marketing, Fusion customer engagement applications are built using APEX. So what has changed in the last 12 months? What have we been doing? Well, APEX development team has been working very closely with Fusion development team. And the goal is for us to incorporate APEX platform into the massive Fusion ecosystem. And that means installing APEX into Fusion databases. It means deploying Word's middle tier so customers can run APEX applications. It means figuring out authentication patterns and authorization patterns, how to access Fusion REST APIs, how to do globalization, how to do continuous integration and deployment for APEX apps. And the result of all of this work is that Fusion developers at Oracle now have a choice. For a particular problem, they can choose between different technologies, including APEX, to build a native Fusion application. And teams that Larry mentioned, Fusion marketing teams, Fusion sales teams, they are making progress building APEX apps for Fusion. And in our experience, it turns out that building a Fusion factory app, as we call it, is very similar to building a SaaS extension in APEX. It is the same authentication and authorization patterns that Simon talked about today. For accessing Fusion data from APEX factory applications, it's the same ADF and BOSS adapters that Steve talked about. The only thing that is a little bit different is look and feel and UI, because as I mentioned before, native Fusion applications utilize the Redwood design system. So for APEX factory applications, we do use some internal components that are not publicly available at this time, but this could change in the future. Bottom line is this collaboration between APEX development teams and Fusion development teams already resulted in a number of under the covers enhancements in APEX, and there will be many more, and you as customers will be able to take advantage of them. As hopefully we've demonstrated today, in the last 12 months, APEX has improved our SaaS extensions story, and there are definitely many more opportunities to go, and we'll continue to invest into this area so that APEX can be a compelling solution for extending Oracle Fusion SaaS applications. And that's all we have today. Thank you. We have been answering questions in chat. I don't really see any questions outstanding, so perhaps we can maybe wrap this up.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you to you, and thank you to all the other speakers. Any questions you guys want to highlight? Anything that stuck out? All right, well, thanks again for walking us through all the details of how to build these applications. Again, the recording is going to be made available. So if you want to try it out yourself later, you'll be able to watch the recording. Yeah, with that, I'd like to thank you all. Very well done. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.